It all started with an innocent invitation, one that I almost tossed aside as another one of Carl's wild ideas. Carl, my best friend since college, was the type of guy who would dare to do anything once. He loved to push the boundaries of social norms, at least when it came to my social life. So when he mentioned a swing party one Friday afternoon while we were grabbing coffee, I almost spat out my latte. "Don't look at me like that," Carl had said, half laughing. "You always claim you need to live a little. This is living, Alex." Carl was persuasive, dangerously persuasive, and maybe, just maybe, I was a bit curious. "Come on, it'll be fun. No pressure, just a chance to see what all the buzz is about." I wasn't naive. I knew what he was talking about. Swinging. The kind of party where couples mix, mingle, and, well, swap partners. I'd heard whispers, read articles in the back pages of magazines, and joked about it with my other friends. But the idea of attending one, that felt like stepping into an alternate universe. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face that world, but curiosity tugged at me. "Do you think we're really cut out for that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Carl grinned, always the confident one. "We're not cut out for it. We're just gonna watch and see what happens. You don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with." I gave him a skeptical look. "And what if I get uncomfortable?" He shrugged. "Then we leave. It's not like we have to go in and participate. It's just about being open-minded." Being open-minded was Carl's code for anything vaguely rebellious, but for some reason I agreed. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I was more than the cautious, overthinking bookworm I'd always been. Maybe it was just the thrill of stepping outside my usual boundaries. The night of the party, I felt like I was stepping into a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I wasn't sure. Carl had this way of making everything sound more glamorous than it probably was. He'd put on his best fancy but casual outfit, and me? Well, I just wore the first thing I found in my closet. A simple black dress, nothing too flashy, but enough to blend in. It wasn't like I was planning to get noticed. When we arrived, I was surprised by the sheer opulence of the place. The house was huge, like something you'd see in a reality TV show about rich people's vacations. Smooth jazz played in the background as the door opened, revealing a woman in her mid-30s who introduced herself as Jenna. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her smile was so polished that I immediately felt underdressed and out of place. "Welcome, welcome," she said, ushering us in with a warmth that was almost too professional. "Don't be shy. Drinks are at the bar, and the lounge area is over there." I glanced over at Carl, who seemed to know everyone already. He was chatting with some random couple in the corner, clearly at ease. It made me wonder if Carl had done this before, and I made a mental note to grill him later about that. As I stood there, awkwardly clutching my glass of wine, I noticed the atmosphere was less wild than I'd expected, at least at first. People seemed normal enough. Well, normal for people in a ritzy neighborhood who had way too much time on their hands. They wore silk robes, the occasional suit, and in some cases very little clothing at all. But there was a kind of unspoken agreement in the air. Everyone was here for a reason, and no one was going to act too shocked when things went a bit unorthodox. I tried to ease myself into the evening by talking to a few of the women, but they all seemed so experienced, like they knew exactly what they were doing. I, on the other hand, felt like a deer in headlights. I'd heard people say these parties weren't about just sex, but that seemed to be a lie. The tension in the room was palpable. There was an energy that hummed in the air, something that buzzed like electricity. Then I saw him. He was tall, much taller than Carl, with broad shoulders and a calm, confident smile. His skin was a deep shade of brown, and his presence seemed to demand attention, without him even having to try. It wasn't just his physical appearance that stood out, it was how he carried himself. He had this easy charm, an aura of mystery that made me feel both intimidated and strangely drawn to him. His eyes locked with mine for just a second, and I swear I felt a jolt run through me. I turned away quickly, embarrassed by the sudden rush of heat in my chest. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of people these were. I mean, I'd read all the articles, watched a few documentaries, but seeing it all in person, it was overwhelming. The night stretched on, people laughing, drinking, chatting, and everything in between. At some point, Carl had disappeared with a couple from the corner, leaving me to fend for myself in a sea of strangers. And that's when it happened. That moment that changed everything. But that's a story for another time. I didn't expect the night to spiral the way it did. I thought it was just a fun, maybe awkward experience where I'd watch and laugh at Carl's antics while sipping overpriced wine. But when I turned my head back towards the man from earlier, let's call him Malik, everything changed. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me or the fact that his gaze seemed so steady, so deliberate. But the moment was different. Felt charged. You know that feeling when you're in a room full of people, yet suddenly everything around you fades into the background. That's exactly what happened when Malik took a step towards me. He wasn't pushy. In fact, he moved with this calm confidence that made you want to trust him. I could hear the clink of glasses and laughter from across the room, but all I could focus on was him. His presence was magnetic, and for a split second, I felt like I was the only person in the room. "You look like you're a little out of place," he said with a half smile. His voice smooth like velvet. His words weren't judgmental, more like an observation. He didn't wait for me to respond. He just stood there, giving me the space to figure out what to do next. I glanced over at Carl, who was still deep in conversation with the couple from earlier. He was laughing, of course he was. Carl always looked like he belonged in these situations, like he'd lived 1,000 different lives before this one. Me. I was still figuring out if I even belonged here. "I guess I am," I said, surprised at how honest I sounded. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was just how easy it was to talk to Malik. "I didn't exactly plan on being here tonight." He chuckled softly. "Most people don't plan for a swing party. It kind of finds you." I laughed nervously. "Is that so?" "Yeah." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "But you're not just here for the party, are you?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He tilted his head, studying me for a moment. "You're the type of person who thinks about things before they dive in. I can tell." It wasn't just his observation that threw me. It was how accurate it was. I was the type who overanalyzed every decision, who weighed pros and cons until the opportunity passed. It wasn't until tonight that I realized how often I'd missed out on life's more spontaneous moments. I always played it safe. "So, what exactly do you do at one of these parties?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart was thumping a little too loud in my chest. Malik smiled like he was amused by the question. "It's not about what you do. It's about how you feel." He leaned in a little, his gaze dropping to my lips for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "You can just watch or you can dive in. No one's forcing you either way." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. This wasn't how I imagined the evening would go. I was here to observe, not to participate. Yet, the way Malik spoke, the way he made me feel like I was the only one in the room, well, it stirred something inside me that I wasn't used to. Before I could process any more of it, Carl reappeared, as if summoned by some cosmic force. He slapped me on the back, clearly in good spirits, and shot me a knowing grin. "You talking to Malik?" Carl asked, his voice practically oozing with a kind of playful mischief. I nodded, trying to seem nonchalant. "Just chatting." "Well, be careful," Carl warned with a wink. "Malik's got a reputation around here. He's been known to make even the most cautious people change their minds." The words hit me a little harder than they should have. Was Carl hinting at something? Was he trying to tell me that Malik was someone I should be wary of? But before I could think too much about it, Carl was already pulling me toward the back of the house. "Come on, let's explore. You said you wanted to live a little, right?" I didn't have time to protest before he dragged me through a set of glass doors that led to a large backyard. It was darker out there, lit by twinkling fairy lights and surrounded by soft music. There were people scattered around the yard, some talking, others wrapped in quiet, intimate conversations. It was strange how normal everything felt, Despite the fact that I was surrounded by people who weren't just pushing boundaries, they were rewriting them. Carl handed me another drink and pointed to the pool. "Hey, there's a hot tub over there. Think you can handle that?" His eyes gleamed with mischief. I raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "Of course I'm serious." He took a long sip of his own drink, then lowered his voice. "But hey, if you're not up for it, no pressure. Just keep an eye on Malik. He's got this way of making people feel free." That's when it hit me. Carl wasn't just here to observe either. He was on a mission to push my boundaries to see how far I could go. Maybe it was his way of living vicariously through me. I found myself laughing despite my unease. I think I've already gone way past what I thought I could handle tonight. Carl winked again and then drifted off to chat with some other guests. And just like that, I was left alone, again, with my thoughts, my drink, and the growing feeling that this night wasn't going to end like I thought it would. Malik was still somewhere in the back of my mind. His calm, confident smile lingering like a memory I couldn't shake. And as the night wore on, I realized one thing for sure. I was already in deeper than I expected. And I had no idea how much further I'd go before the night was over. The evening dragged on, and with every passing minute, I felt myself becoming more and more aware, not just of the people around me but of the space I occupied. The air was thick with subtle invitations, and I couldn't tell whether I was supposed to be a participant in this strange world or a passive observer. And let's be real, the lines between the two were starting to blur. Carl was nowhere to be found, which, in hindsight, probably wasn't a surprise. He was like that, always floating in and out of conversations with people he barely knew. Meanwhile, I was left to navigate this odd party by myself, nursing a drink that had long since lost its appeal. I glanced around, trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone, but it was hard not to. People were everywhere. Casual conversations, flirtatious glances, and the soft laughter that echoed through the room created an atmosphere that was both welcoming and, honestly, a little overwhelming. That's when I felt it again. Malik's gaze. It wasn't subtle. Never was with him. This time, he was standing near the entrance to the backyard, leaning against the doorframe, watching me with a sort of quiet intensity. It wasn't creepy, no, not at all, but there was something magnetic about it. As if he had an entire world to offer, and I was the only one who could see it. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step back, my stomach suddenly fluttering in a way I couldn't quite place. I wasn't used to being the object of someone's attention like that. Not like this. It was almost as if he could read every thought I was having, and that made me both excited and terrified. Having fun. Malik's voice came from behind me. I didn't jump, but I did turn around, startled. "Oh, yeah, I'm good. Just trying to figure it out." He chuckled, his voice low and smooth. "You don't have to figure it out right now. You're already here. That's enough." His words hung in the air, and for a second, I felt like he knew exactly what I was thinking. He had a way of making everything sound like it was meant to be. Like this was all destiny and I was just too busy fighting it. I was nervous. Way more nervous than I wanted to admit. "Well, it's not exactly what I expected," I said, trying to sound more relaxed than I felt. "You thought it would be crazier, huh?" Malik asked, with a grin that seemed to show a little too much understanding. "Some wild orgy, probably. That's what everyone thinks at first." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, well, that was kind of my mental image." He tilted his head, that charming smile still in place. "It's different for everyone. Some people come for the party, some come for the connection. It's not always about what you do. It's about how you feel." I swallowed. It was clear I wasn't just talking to a stranger now. I was talking to someone who got it. Someone who understood the unspoken rules of this world, of this scene. And that made me wonder if I was being led into something I wasn't ready for. But before I could second-guess myself, Malik spoke again. "You've been watching for a while. But what do you want, Alex?" His question hit me like a wave. What did I want? The thing was, I wasn't sure. I had no idea what I was doing here. Sure, I'd agreed to come with Carl, but deep down I didn't know if I wanted to be part of this world. But Malik's question wasn't about what I was supposed to want. It felt like he was giving me permission to be honest with myself, which, let's face it, was something I rarely did. I guess. I don't know, I said, more to myself than to him. I've never really been the kind of person to just let go. I like control. Malik's grin widened slightly, and I swear for a moment, he seemed to know exactly what I was talking about. It wasn't just about this party, about swinging. It was about everything in my life. About how I always had to have a plan, a backup plan, a failsafe for everything. My friends joked that I was practically allergic to spontaneity. You don't have to give up control, he said, his voice dropping a little lower. Not here. Not if you don't want to. But I think you're more capable of letting go than you realize. The heat of his words settled into my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. Why was I letting him make me feel like this? I wasn't that kind of person. I'd always been cautious, calculated, making sure I never crossed lines I wasn't ready to cross. But the way Malik spoke to me made everything feel like an invitation. An invitation I was both terrified of and strangely drawn to. Then, as if the universe decided to throw in a little extra chaos, Carl returned, completely oblivious to the current tension between me and Malik. He was smiling, probably a little too much, like he'd just had the best conversation of his life. "Hey, you two still talking?" Carl said, grinning as he clapped me on the shoulder. I looked between Carl and Malik. Was Carl aware of how intense the situation had become? Did he see the way Malik was looking at me? Or was he just oblivious, as usual? Malik gave Carl a nod, that same easy, confident grin on his face. Just keeping Alex company. Carl raised an eyebrow, his smile turning sly. "Well, I think it's time for her to really experience the party. You ready to step it up a notch, Alex?" Froze. Was Carl encouraging me? Was this his way of pushing me past my boundaries? Of forcing me into something I wasn't sure I was ready for? Before I could respond, Carl leaned in closer, whispering something in my ear that made me shiver. "Don't overthink it, Alex. You're here to have fun, right?" Carl's words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. "Don't overthink it, Alex. You're here to have fun, right?" Fun. Was that really what I was doing? Or was I just stumbling into something that felt more like an experiment? An experiment in self-control, in boundaries, in letting go. I didn't have time to answer because Carl had already turned away to talk to someone else, leaving me with that lingering question and Malik's calm, watchful presence. For a moment I felt paralyzed. Malik had said I didn't have to give up control if I didn't want to. That was the one thing that stuck with me. But could I really stand there, frozen, as I let everyone else dictate what happened next? Wasn't part of the reason I'd come here to figure out what I wanted? I looked at Malik, and for the first time I saw the depth of his patience. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't rushing me. He was just there waiting. For me to figure it out, or maybe for me to make the decision that only I could make. I took a deep breath. "Malik, what exactly do you get out of all this?" Yes. The question felt too blunt, but I didn't care. I needed to understand. I needed to know if this was just a game for him or something deeper. He chuckled softly, his gaze softening. "People think they come here for the thrill, for the excitement. But what they really want is connection. True freedom is about being who you really are, without the fear of judgment. And for some people that's enough." His words hit me differently than I expected. Connection. I hadn't thought of it that way. I had assumed everyone here was just trying to escape something, to find temporary relief from their lives. But Malik made it sound like this was something more, something that had depth even in a place as chaotic as this. I glanced back at Carl, who was still talking animatedly with some other guests, lost in his own little world. Part of me felt relief. At least he wasn't hovering over me, pushing me into something I wasn't ready for. "Maybe I'm just not ready for that," I said quietly. "Maybe I'm still figuring it out." Malik nodded, his expression understanding. "You don't have to rush it, Alex. This kind of thing is personal. It's about being open to possibilities, to feeling comfortable with where you are. I looked at him, and for the first time that night I felt like I was really hearing him. There was no pressure, no rush. Just a gentle reminder that I didn't have to be anyone other than who I was. I think I'll just watch tonight, I said, my voice steady now. Maybe that's all I need. To just see how it feels without getting involved. Malik smiled, that same patient, knowing smile. That's a good choice. Sometimes, being a witness is more powerful than being a participant. The air felt lighter somehow. Could breathe again. I could be myself without needing to prove anything, without the fear of stepping into something I wasn't prepared for. We both stood there for a while, watching the others move around us. The conversations, the laughter, the casual touches. Everything felt less intimidating now. I realized that I didn't need to be a part of every single moment. I could simply exist in this space, taking it in as it came. Eventually, Carl came back over, his grin wide as ever. So, what's the verdict? You ready to dive in? I shook my head, but not with any sense of regret. I'm good, Carl. I think I've had enough for tonight. He looked at me curiously, but then shrugged, giving me a playful wink. Suit yourself. But you know, there's always next time. Yeah, I said, smiling a little. Maybe. The night ended quietly. By the time Carl and I left, the glow of the house was fading behind us, and the cool air of the night felt like a gentle exhale. I had learned something important that evening, about myself, about boundaries, and about what it meant to truly choose. I hadn't expected to walk out of there feeling like I had control again, but I did. I hadn't let anyone push me into something I wasn't ready for. I had made the decision on my own, to simply be present and observe. And that felt empowering. Carl rambled on in the car ride home about all the people he had met, all the new experiences he'd had, but I barely listened. My thoughts were elsewhere, on how tonight had been about much more than just what happened inside that house. It had been a journey of self-discovery, of learning that I didn't need to follow anyone's rules but my own. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally learning to let go, not of control but of the idea that I had to be anything other than who I already was.